progress that we are making relative to those measures, and in areas where there's a stumble or we're unable to achieve the kind of results as projected, we are going to share very openly with the South African public. We do, parallel to this, or in addition to this, we do engage with the industry, just taking them through the kind of work that we are doing. The energy intensive users, we engage with them in their various manifestations. Just this morning, we're meeting with SAPOA, the South African Property Owners Association, just to see what are the additional and joint measures that we can take with them to ensure that we provide degree of relief and they contribute towards the resolution of the load shedding problem in our country. I must say that the system continues to be under significant strain. As I talked to you just this morning, the Eskom generation fleet has experienced unplanned outages, what we call the unplanned capability loss factor. Especially this, we are referring to the lack of reliability of these units that are Eskom. We have about approximately 81 of these units. So collectively, the unplanned outages just this morning we're sitting at about 18,000 megawatts. So this is significant. This undermines our ability to maintain load shedding at the lower stages. And we know that there's been several units that are responsible for this kind of poor performance. Early in the week on Monday, when Eskom was trying to return one of the two units that were out of operation in Kriel, this exercise then resulted in the 4 operating units being taken out, and that really rang alarm bells, essentially increasing the unplanned outages. We know that we still have units at Letabo, Tutuka, and Medupi that have been out over the past week. I'm making this point just to illustrate that central to the resolution of the load shedding problem remains our ability to ensure that we improve the energy availability factor, the reliability of these units. And it is for these reasons that I'll be sharing with you some of the measures that we are taking, working with the leadership of Eskom under the acting group chief executive, but also more significantly on the generation side, Mr. Beki, who has been very key in the resolution of this problem. So we really want to say thank you very much to Mr. Nxumalo and of course the collective of the managers at the station level who continue to work with us in earnest. So this unplanned outages has resulted with Eskom being forced to implement stage 6, and as Eskom's communication has been saying that it's stage 6 almost indefinitely. And of course there are measures that we are taking in addition to load shedding, which is really an instrument that is meant to protect the grid and ensure that we remain within the acceptable band of frequency, that demand doesn't far exceed the supply. And for that, what you do is that you deny users the right to have access to electricity so that you are able to balance demand and supply, and this exercise is what we come to call load shedding. As you can imagine now, we are entering into the cold periods of the year. We are progressing into winter, and this demand has increased significantly, and we have seen that now this peak demand is now at about 30,000 megawatts, and we know that the cold periods of winter are still ahead of us, and therefore there's a need for us to ensure that we remain true to these efforts, and in fact we make everything possible to accelerate these measures, in addition to the momentum that we've built over a period of time. I'm making this point because I'm alive to the fact that as I speak to you, the vast majority of this country is unable to take this feed because of the drop calls, because they don't have access to television as a result of load shedding. A number of people continue to lose their jobs. A lot of households don't know where to get their next meal because breadwinners have lost jobs. So this is a particularly trying period in the history of our country. So we are alive to that, and we are doing everything possible to ensure that we address the situation. Eskom does remain on track to ensure that we are able to return the 3 units at Kusile as indicated before. The timeline that we have, it's about November and December, and cumulatively these 3 units should give us 2,100 megawatts. But I thought that I must take this opportunity just to share with you what is it that has been achieved since our previous update, because it's important that we are able to illustrate that there's a degree of traction and movement in these efforts that we are making, and we are able to convey to the country, industry, households, that of course you are not necessarily seeing the results directly because we are still at higher stages of load shedding, but we want to give you the comfort and the assurance that we are doing everything possible to address this situation. So what is it that we have achieved since we met in this format about a week ago? First is that Eskom has an open application for the distribution demand management program, which provides a financial incentive for demand reduction by commercial and residential customers. We did make the point, if you remember last week, that demand-side interventions are going to be a focal point as we enter into December, because the initiatives at the household level, they are cheaper and faster. Of course, once we aggregate the number of households and commerce that are participating, we are likely going to see this result coming to fruition rather rapidly. So what this program does really is to provide an incentive, a financial incentive for every megawatt. There's an incentive of 3 million rand. Every megawatt that has been saved, there's an incentive of 3 million rand. And of course, like I said, it's aimed at ensuring that we are able to achieve demand reduction during specified periods. And this will typically be during periods of peak, so that we are able to attenuate the peak, so that we are able to match the generation side. And to the extent that we are unable to match the generation side, the amount of load shedding that will be affected at that time will not be as severe. Of course, we do want to give the assurance that we are going to build some degree of assurance to ensure that those that are deserving are the ones that are going to receive this incentive, so that we are able to minimize any form or opportunity of leakage. And all applicants will be subjected to an independent measurement and verification of the proposed baseline. So you give us the baseline, and relative to the reduction of those baseline, we are able to provide these incentives. So we'll be able to, Eskom, to provide some degree of independent review to make sure that there's no abuse of this system. The last time we were here last week, we did indicate that as part of the NECOM initiative going into the winter period, there's a number of programs that are receiving elevated attention. So I'm happy to say that NERSA will be holding public hearings on the ministerial determination for 3 of NECOM's initiatives on the 19th of May. So we're really talking about a situation that will be happening soon, this public hearings. And this is to ensure that there's concurrence, because this ministerial determination must receive NERSA concurrence, and NERSA is engaging in that transparent and democratized process to ensure that we are able to announce to the country these measures, this ministerial determination. So there are 3 principal programs. So the one is around the load shedding reduction program. The second one is around the cross-border purchase program. And then the third one is on the emergency generation program. And these 3 programs, once we are able to achieve, obtain NERSA's concurrence, should be able to give us a cumulative figure of 3,800 of new generation capacity. So we're looking forward to that exercise, NERSA completing that exercise, so that we are able to enter into this contracting period. And then the third area is that where the contracting has been finalized for close to about 400 megawatts of additional capacity. through a program called the Standard Offer Program, which will be online before the end of May 2023. So we're really trying to illustrate that these are truncated processes to make it possible that we get some degree of relief as we enter the winter period. We did indicate that the projected peak is about 34,000 megawatts. And in fact, in some extreme cases, we know that historic peak has been at about 37,000 megawatts. So we want to bring this 400 megawatts online just in time for the winter period. Each and every little megawatt we can get is going to help to provide additional relief. And this additional capacity comes from amongst others, the Kelvin power station, the one in Johannesburg, and some of the large-scale industrial producers, such as Sasol, are going to make it possible for us to get this additional 400 megawatts. The last time we were together, I did indicate that load shedding is placing a lot of pressure on primary production in this country, in the agricultural sector. The agricultural sector was sharing with me that 23% of their production is based on activities that requires the supply of reliable and quality energy. And then what we're trying to do is that working with the SOE in that space of agriculture, the land bank, the primary actor, state actor in that instance, is that the land bank has established a fund of 2.5 billion rands to help to invest for farmers in alternative energy solutions to support the energy security, and hopefully we'll be able to pass on those savings to the end consumer so that we undermine the inflationary pressures that are associated with the increased cost of production. And really, this is a blended facility, a mix of both grant and loan, so that we make it possible that we are able to address the situation, the pressures that is faced by the farming community in the country. And the grant component ranges from about 30% to 70%. So you can see that we really are trying every effort to make sure that we relieve this pressure on behalf, in this instance, on farmers. I'm happy to say that National Treasury is finalizing adjustments for the loan guarantee scheme to establish an energy bounce back scheme, which will be launched very shortly. And we want to really truncate these processes, make it possible for investment on rooftop solar by commercial players, small and medium players, to ensure that indeed we make it possible for them to roll out solar and continue with regards to uninterrupted provision of their services to the country, and we're able to protect the situation in the country. Again, I did make the point in the last meeting that we are doing everything possible to improve the energy availability factor. I had made the point when I started here that the unplanned outages are sitting at about 18,000 megawatts. So essentially the resolution of the performance and the reliability of this unit at Eskom is indispensable to the resolution of load shedding. And one of the issues that we are working with the leadership of Eskom, both the board and management in this instance, Mr. Ngumalo is the head of generation, and working with the private sector again, is to ensure that we are able to do two things. The first one is around us embedding, if you like, the expertise that is required to support the existing capacity that is at the station level. I think the point we're making is that we're not casting any aspersions. We're able to draw on the plethora of experience that exists in the South African energy space, working with the multiple players, and we are going to embed this capacity to work with the station managers. We have had engagement with the original equipment manufacturers. Is a conversation we'll be concluding with Eskom. They've also committed to ensuring that they bring their expertise to bear, because they've got an appreciation of how these units operate, and is a detail that we'll be completing. And then the second one of these additional skills is around the open cycle gas turbines. I did make the point that we want to exploit further these open cycle gas turbines. Of course, there are two constraints. The one is a financing one, and I did make mention the last time that Eskom has got a 30 billion rand, if you like, in their war chest to ensure that they are able to procure diesel. To the extent that that's not sufficient, I think myself and the leadership of Eskom will make advances to the necessary authorities in government to make a case. I mean, to the extent that that will be necessary. But for now, we're working within that envelope of 30 billion rands. But also the second constraint is about the logistics. I mean, like I said, we've got 40 million rands, 40 million liters of storage capacity off-site. At Ankerlech, on-site is 17 million liters. But for us to be able to run these OCGTs, we will need to ensure that that the capacity is not compromised, because we'll need to replenish with speed the on-site facilities, and of course there are constraints with regards to the number of trucks that we can get into those the power station, and as I'm talking about Ankerlech. And then on the other Grootegeluk, we know that we don't have an issue with regards to how we are able to bring in the diesel, because it is piped. So we'll be looking to the expertise to help us to address the issues around the logistics. And then the other one is around the returning to operation, the 3 units at Kusile. We have our own timelines, but I think it's important that those timelines, if you like, the critical path gets to be stress tested, and that's why we're having a conversation with experts to make sure that when we say we are retaining these units at this particular time, indeed we are able to do that. I did make the point that part of the biggest problems we are having now is what we call outage slips, our inability to retain the units at the time at which we had promised. And then we also, the kind of progress we've made is around the need for us to address, like I said, the demand side, the management program, and also the energy saving measures. We did make the point that households consume a significant amount of installed grid, can be about 35% at peak. So we really are working on that demand side interventions. A lot of municipalities have started. So we're adding on to that efforts of municipalities. I mean, in terms of our calculation, so you need about 200,000 households to commit to this, assuming that the average consumption is about 5 megawatts or so, of 1,000 households, 5 megawatts. Then for us to be able to reduce by one stage of load shedding, you need 200,000 households to be committed to this program. And that's why we're working in earnest to ensure that we're able to address this. I did say that this morning we had a meeting with SAPOA. SAPOA has got an opportunity to offer about 100 million square meters of rooftop space. And in terms of their own computation, I mean, if working at 50% of that space, we should be in a position to get about 9.5 gigawatts. So 9,500 megawatts is possible. And a lot of these retailers, these property owners have moved down the line in terms of project preparation. They don't need money from the state. They will raise money from the commercial banks. All they need is a resolution around issues around feed-in tariffs, and is work that we are doing with our colleagues at NICOM, working with municipalities to ensure that that dispensation exists. The framework for feed-in tariff, the framework for wheeling should be in place so that NERSA can determine the necessary tariff structure. I did make the point last time that we are still on track to accelerate the return of Kusile Unit 5. We're looking to return that by October of 2023. Of course, again, this is another illustration of an outage slip, but we're confident of bringing it back by October of this year. And if you come to think of it, it's 800 megawatts. We spoke about the 3 units at Kusile, 2,100 megawatts collectively, and Unit 4 at Medupi. I did indicate that there's an accelerated path to get it on stream, an additional 800 megawatts in early of 2024 because of the second-hand generators that we have been able to lay our hands on, the one in the Netherlands. The last time we did say that we need to accelerate the release of further bid windows, so we're looking for the request for proposal of 5,000 megawatts of wind and PV, 1,200 megawatts of battery storage, and 3,000 megawatts of gas in the month of June. That is the release request for proposal. I think the point we made here is that we need to release, especially on the renewable side, they must match areas where there's grid capacity. You know that the last bid window, we couldn't allocate everything because I think there was asymmetry in relation to where these projects were located and then where the grid capacity is. So it's important that there's some degree of symmetry so that we're able to realize the benefits going into the future. And then on the launch of the load shedding reduction program and the cross-border purchase program, these two programs will enable emergency power solutions to be brought online within 6 months of the signing of the power purchase agreement. And we expect to launch this by June of this year. So it's essentially next month. And the part of the reason is that we are looking at NERSA's concurrence. So, of course, there has been issues around the court ruling in relation to critical infrastructure, as the courts put it, the hospitals, police station, you name them, and clinics. So that's a conversation that is finding its way through the courts. There's that appeal process. But the point I want to register here is that we continue to be seized with an effort to look for solutions to provide some degree of relief to these institutions. I'll share with you, I think, once we do the Q&A on the computation, the initial computation that we have done, working with the leading OEM in this space, to just do a computation, what is the rent value that will be associated with us to be able to achieve, if you like, the kind of results that we want to achieve going into the future. So I'll leave it here, Michael, and I'm sure Rudy and the team will come through.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Minister, very kindly. Without further ado, I'm going to ask Rudy to come and give us a top-up. Are you covered, Rudy? Covered today. So, folks, we're not going to delve into the two presentations today. Please come and join us here, Mr. Dix. And it's very nice to see Mr. Dix in person. There are disadvantages to the virtual thing. I was starting to think that he's a hologram, so at least I can see he's a real guy. I don't know if that's okay, but Rudy, if you are. All right, thank you. What we're not going to do this afternoon is then take the two presentations. Rudy would have delved a bit more into some of the technical areas. I think Minister's adequately touched all those. And then also, I do apologize to my ESCOM colleagues. They did have an update on the system. But because we've had this challenge of trying to oscillate between a virtual and a physical this week, they weren't able to connect. But what we'll do is they will share information with us if they want during any of the questions. And Takalani has opened the link for colleagues in the media to post. But I think what I'd like to do, before I give Takalani an opportunity, can I first, and where's the roving mic, please? Who's handling that? Takalani's multitasking. Roving mic, can members of the media in Tshedimosetso House please have an opportunity to pose your questions first, and then I'll turn to Mr. Takalani Makwebo to invite those who've submitted a number of questions already online. Anyone in the room who'd like to pose a question, please? And remember, the protocol is to indicate your media house and your name. And I would request that, please. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Hello, I'm Melissa from Citizen. Hello, Minister and colleagues. I just want to find out, Minister, how would you respond to the public's criticism of your position? You know, we see a lot of people saying, how long you've been in the newly appointed position, and then, the escalating stages of load shedding continuing. So how would you respond to that?
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Unfortunately, these lights of our broadcasters are quite bright, so I can't see at the back if one of the media. Vanessa, are we okay? All right. Let's take over the mic to Mr. Takalani Makwebo. Tagi, can we hear online, please?
Thank you very much, Mr. Karim. We have a couple of questions online. The first three are coming from Digital Life, which is an online community radio station. And the first question is, Minister, can you please assist us outline a plan of the measures that you are taking to overcome what the country is going through as the ministry together with with ESCOM? And number two is, I hear you are talking about lower levels, and I'm sitting here now with without power from 1 p.m. until 5, and we only have 4 hours of power remaining, today. And please assist what state is that of 11 hours of power per 24 hours. And the last question is, if ESCOM reaches a stage where the grid collapses, what is the plan in place to keep the country going? And the second question is from Terence Klimo from Engineering News. And the question is, the President called for power shifts yesterday. And are there load shedding reduction program or the cross-border program and the emergency program designed to procure such capacity? And will other technologies also be considered? And what is the time frame for this program and programs? And the last question for now from my side, from Achara from the Reuters News. And the question is, what is the worst case scenario that the country should prepare for in the coming winter months? And is it reasonable to expect stage 7 or 8 load shedding? And are fears of a total grid collapse warranted? Thanks.
Thank you, Vitaki. Takalani, am I just checking? You have others, but you're stopping there for now. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Over to you. Thank you. Minister, Mr. Dix, you are most welcome to take it from there, or you can come to the podium. Oh, yeah, let's do the podium because our TV friends need that. Minister, over to you, and then perhaps Dix afterwards. Back up to the podium. Please, Mr. Dix. Yeah, really, our TV folks need to see you.
Minister is insisting that I go before him. Thanks, Minister. I would leave some of the questions to the Minister, but can I close this one? No, it's going to take. I put the questions on my computer, so I'm just trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. I won't touch it. Okay, so, I think what the Minister has done, of course, is has set out what are the more urgent updates that we've done in relation to the plan, but he's also set out what are the urgent measures that we can do. Now, the point that we've been making in these interventions is that there is a long lead time, right, if we talk about additional megawatts that are going to come in place. But it's important for us to set that into motion as quickly as possible so that, as we move towards those megawatts coming onto the grid, and again, it's technology agnostic, right? It's not about specific sets of technologies, what technology we can get on as quickly as possible and how we can dispatch those electrons as a matter of urgency. And what we need to do is, of course, set into motion processes for that to happen as a matter of principle. That requires for us to be able to do it with speed. That requires for us to be able to procure as quickly as possible. That requires for us to, as we've done already, make a number of changes from a regulatory point of view to allow for private sector investment to happen. And I think this is quite important. The area that the Minister points out is that there are 2 specific areas that we have to look at as part of that plan as we move into winter. The first is to try and see how quickly we can recover units that go through partial or full load losses. And I think this is important for us, that we need to specifically look at how we can support ESCOM, where units trip because of a whole set of different reasons, technical reasons, that we need to get them back online as quickly as possible. What are the other sort of interventions, keeping the maintenance regime in place and ensuring that we do that, including those units that have gone out on long-term as a result of a whole set of intervention, a whole set of challenges, Kusile being one of it, Medupi being one of it. That's the one thing, right, that we need to do. So we need a very strict, rigorous process to ensure that ESCOM has an opportunity to be able to do that. The second point that the Minister raises is important around some of the emergency power. And if there's emergency power that can happen as a matter of urgency and can get megawatts onto the grid, then we need to ensure that we expedite it. The third area that has been quite important is the issue around saving and demand side management. So this is quite critical because as on the slides you see there that if we do put into place demand side measures, and that means simply us folks having to save, switch off your geyser, right? Businesses putting together, households and businesses putting in smart meters that can reduce our demand onto the grid. This is important. We've done this before. We've said this on many occasions. We did it during 2010. We did it during 2015. We were able to save hundreds of megawatts. And these are going to be important interventions for us to be able to do. So a coordinated campaign, we've started that. We've had it in Daba. We started to look at a whole set of different interventions for us to reduce our demand consumption so that we are able to save. And this is the kind of measures that we'll put in place and where we required a whole of society approach. So it's not only government trying to ensure that we put in these interventions. It's important for us to put off the lights. It's important for business to be able to ensure that they put in also energy-saving technology and measures. It's important for households to be able to do that. It's a whole of society approach that requires for us to be able to do it in that particular manner. And so I think this is quite important as part of the plan going forward. It's a combination of all these different things that would happen. Minister, I'll leave the grid, the issue around the grid, yeah. Then the issue of the power supply. Yes, President has always made this point, and we have also supported it, right? That we need any form of emergency power that would have to come on. The President has also made it very clear on many occasions, right, that when we talk about emergency procurement, we need to look at potentially whether we're able to reduce that time frame. So his point that he makes, and the Minister makes his point, is what are the sorts of technology that we need to get in place as quickly as possible? What are the particular sets of regulations that we need to approve and get those as quickly as possible? And power ships is one of that. So Terence, yes, I think that, again, when the ESCOM program is referring to the load reduction program and emergency measures, it is technology agnostic. It looks at all sets of different technologies that can get on. Again, the point here is, how can we get megawatts onto the grid as quickly as possible? So you can't be defining it's only this technology or that technology. The principle of the load reduction program is to enter into an arrangement with those that can provide emergency power and secure this over the next 5 years. So, of course, power ships, I'm not going to make reference to power ship as the specific company, but power ships would obviously be part of that particular set of mix. And ESCOM has made that very, very clear, including battery storage, including other forms of technology. Again, this is going to be an important area that ESCOM will have to consider on a case-by-case basis. It would have to look at costs. It would have to look at how quickly this would be able to get onto the grid. And so I think it's quite important for us to look at it in that context and not look at it as a specific technology view that we take on it. So I think this is quite important for us to be able to clarify this as we move into finalizing that load reduction program. As Minister pointed out, we're waiting for the finalization from NERSA and the approval from them on that.
No, thank you very much, Rudy. Just to make the point that when the President unveiled the Energy Action Plan in 2002, mid-2002, June, July, the energy availability factor was significantly better than where we are today. So what we have seen is that is a gradual deterioration of the energy availability factor. So the appointment of Minister of Electricity doesn't improve the energy availability factor. What improves the energy availability factor is the actions we are taking at source, at the point of generation at these units. And what I was sharing with you, amongst others, is to ensure that we are able to bolster that capacity at the level of generation working with the private sector. I made the point that we're working with ESCOM and National Treasury on the procurement dispensation to make it possible for them to acquire these components that are necessary to get these units back on into operation without taking an inordinate amount of time or encountering what I call outage slips. I mean, as I speak to you, these outage slips, they account for over 2,000 megawatts on average over the past month or so. So it's a set of action that must happen. And as we do those action, I did say when I started that, for an example, one of our best performing power station, Creel, all the units went out on Monday. So it's important to have an appreciation, as Rudy puts it. There's long lead time on some of these things, so it's going to take an inordinate amount of time. And of course, we are now at higher stages of load shedding, in part because of increased demand as we enter the winter. And just the other point to be made, and that can be seen because we are even at stage 6, is that if we had not been running the open cycle gas turbines at the rate at which we are running them, we could even be at higher stages of load shedding. And that intervention came now when we're working with the team to make a case that it's important that we exploit this so that they're able to give us a breathing space. As we take out the units, we are not going to go to elevated stages of load shedding. We shared with you measures in the immediate. On emergency procurement, as already puts it, technology agnostic power ships are part of the solution in the mix. And it could also mean, amongst others, power ships that are docked somewhere outside the country, and if there's great capacity, we are able to bring it into the country. So it's a multiplicity of those solutions, and like we say, we're going out now to ensure that we're able to acquire. Of course, there are those that are already in the pipeline. There were issues of environmental impact assessment. They have been cleared with the Department of DFFE. You have seen just the other day, Minister Chris is saying that there was no basis in one of these objections that suggested that the community was not sufficiently consulted, and in fact that the objection was dismissed. So it's going back into that mix. And then just to say that load shedding, just to repeat the point I made earlier on, load shedding is an instrument meant to protect the grid, so that we don't have issues of low or high frequency, low frequency when demand far exceeds supply, high frequency when supply far exceeds demand. So it's an instrument at our disposal. So I want to give the assurance to the country, and will not tire to give this assurance, is that it's highly, highly, highly unlikely that we are going to get to a situation of a blackout. Why is that the case? Is because the system operator maintains about 2,200 or so megawatts of reserve margin. So essentially meant to protect the grid. So, and that person will not take an instruction from the Minister of Electricity, any minister, including the President, is to help to protect the grid. I think that's the point to be made. And yes, I mean, when you generate scenario, I mean, there's a best case scenario. You do also generate the worst case scenario. And after you generate the worst case scenario, you say what are the set of measures that needs to be put in place to avoid that worst case scenario. And yes, the worst case scenario will go beyond even stage 6. I mean, it's obvious that when you generate this, essentially when your unplanned capability loss factor goes up, and then you are reaching levels of peak demand that far exceeds what your projections are, and the generation is much significantly lower than demand, you will reach stages that are higher than what has become the norm to be the ceiling. And of course, what we do working with the team and ESCOM is to say what are these measures. And that's why we're talking about this emergency procurement, the issues around the open cycle gas turbines, just sweating those assets. I mean, it's about essentially banning diesel, but resolving the issues on logistics so that we've got a constant supply. You don't empty the tanks on site at Ankerleg, and it undermines your ability to be able to run those. And then there's issues around demand side management. We did do a computation of what it means. I did say that household consume up to 35% at peak, and we were able to get about 200,000 of these houses with lowering their consumption, especially as it relates to geysers. You are able to save one stage of load shedding, and that's why we are going into that mode. So ESCOM has been doing that, load curtailment, and working with the energy intensive users, the kind of incentives that we said ESCOM is introducing. In addition to that, we need to get to the household to say that the machines must breathe. There's so much that you can exploit under conditions of unreliability. So we're looking to have additional, if you like, measures to make it possible for us to be able to attend to this situation. I did admit when we started People are aggrieved, people are angry, they are justified. Stage 6 load shedding is unbearable. Load shedding in general is unbearable. And you can imagine the amount of hours that you go without electricity. So it's unbearable. And that's why we say that it's justified the anger of the people. But where we are is to ensure that in the midst of that anger, we do everything possible to lower those stages. And like Rudy says, I mean, the impact of these measures will be seen over a period of time. And I'm not here to make a false promise that tomorrow then we're going to remove stage 6, we're going to stage 2. It's about the aggregation of these measures and their efficacies, and that's what is going to get us through the line. Of course, there are measures post-winter. The issues around Kusile Unit 1 to 3, the issues around retaining the Minupi Unit, Unit 5 at Kusile, the additional measures that will be taken with regards to new generation capacity, because it takes time to get to financial close and get them onto the grid. The measures that we are taking with regards to introducing a wheeling framework, feed-in tariff. There's a lot of megawatts that are trapped there that we can release almost immediately. It just requires a policy articulation, and then NERSA will be able to determine those tariffs. That's what the ministry is doing, so that we get that framework. Like I said, this morning we met with SAPUA, and SAPUA says we've got 1 million square meters of roof space. If you're to use up to about 50% of this, you'll be able to get 9,000 megawatts, 9,500. So our agreement with them is that tell us of those buildings that where they are far advanced in their planning, they are able to procure the panels, what the bottleneck is, and we've agreed we'll work together so that we're able to benefit from these solutions going forward. Thanks, Mike.
That's great. Wow. Yeah, no, that's exciting, Minister. Imagine such an enormous contribution. Thank you very much for that first tranche. Tagalani, let's hear from the second tranche, please.
Thank you, Mr. Karen. The second question is from Lami Somaji from the News 24. The question is regarding the standard of at what price is electricity being sold from Kelvin Power Station at Sasol, and is it cheaper than that which ESCOM can produce itself? And we have Chris Yelline from EE Business Intelligence, and the question is to the minister is, will you or DMRE or IPP office have to go out for another public procurement process to reduce the 20-year term of the car power ship projects to something more sensible, say 3 to 5 years? Or how long will this take for new financial growth, or nothing that the existing RMI triple P has been on the table for several years? And we have Tinen Erasmus from Business Day, and the questions to the minister is President Ramokgopa said in Parliament yesterday that accessing emergency generation capacity from power ships is what SA needs right now. And are there any current negotiations between car power ship and the SA government outside the RMI Triple P program? And has government approached car power ship to discuss the possibility of reducing the 20-year contract term agreed under my triple P to 10 or less years? And the question that is directed to ESCOM, there's a lot of speculation that SA is already experiencing load shedding beyond stage 6. Could you confirm what is the maximum number of hours of load shedding that households should experience under stage 6 load shedding? And how many hours of load shedding will be implemented during stage 8 and 10? And as you're planning for load reduction stages for mines, for example, beyond stage 4, please provide an update of all the units that are currently or unplanned outage. And can you provide an update to indicate whether units will be restored sufficiently to move to lower stages of load shedding, and why is the state of the system briefing for the winter period not happened yet, and we are 2 weeks away, as we are 2 weeks away from winter, and what has caused the delay. And there is a question, the following question, which says, in a slide from an ESCOM briefing on Quebec on the 9th of May, it was said that Unit 1 outage 127 has been scheduled to start on the 24th of July 2024, which provides some additional time for the NR to complete their reviews as the issuing of the LTO license for Unit 1 is technically needed to allow fuel to be reintroduced into the reactor. And please advise what the above, the meaning of the above statement. And is Quebec Unit 1 going down again in July 2024 for refueling or maintenance? And if so, why so soon after the current ongoing shutdown, and for how long? And we were under the impression that both units would be ready for the LTO extension by July next year. And the other question is, can someone please talk to us through the Quebec refurbishment processes? And this was the question that was coming from Mariam Isa from the Business Intelligence. And William Bond from Net 24. And the question is, what type of consent or legal framework will be necessary to roll out the demand side management program to limit geyser usage at household level? Or does the state already have the right to install this as things currently stand? And Terence Kramer is back again saying the load shedding reduction program, the cross-border program and the emergency program received ESCOM board approval, and will there be a sense, cap and time to deploy limit? And the other question is there any plan to supply gas stoves to residents as was done by ESCOM in Cape Town? And can we get an update on imports, which is how many megawatts and when? And both questions are coming from Elmo, who represent Engineering News. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just before I give over to the Minister and Mr. Dix, folks, if there's anything that you want to defer to ESCOM, I think we could. Everybody is accessible to Daphne, and I do apologize earlier that they weren't able to be here, and the link of the other platform isn't working too well for them. But please feel free to put those questions. If we didn't get anything from those two, we'll gladly put those two questions back to Daphne, and I'll ensure that the team here at GCIS Takalani will make sure that those questions get to ESCOM and back to the relevant colleague from the media house, if necessary. But with that said, are you going to go first, Mr. Dix? No. Minister's going to go first on this round. Minister Ramokgopa.
Thank you very much for those online questions. Just to make just a general principle with regards to the procurement of a new generation capacity and the unit costs associated with that. I think our general approach is that anything that is cheaper than diesel is worth looking at, because as I speak to you, and I did say that running the open cycle gas turbine costs an inordinate amount of money. So we are only doing that because we want to save the South African economy. So that's the first level of principle. As it relates to what are the tariff structures associated with that additional 100 megawatts that is being drawn from Kelvin, I don't have those details. I'm sure that ESCOM is more than competent to provide that detail. I was simply providing what the overarching principle is. And of course, we want to procure it significantly cheaper than what we're buying, we're purchasing for diesel. All I'm simply saying is that anything that is less than diesel is worth looking at. And whether that then is affordable, it's a different conversation. Chris, thank you very much for coming back. Yes, our stated position, and that's what we presented at NECOM, when we talk of emergency procurement, the length of time is anything between 3 and 5 years. So we're not looking at the levels beyond that period, and that's where we are. That it requires a different negotiation in relation to what is on the table. Absolutely, yes. But our conviction is that anything that we call emergency procurement is 3 to 5 years. We think that's the amount of window that we require for us to be able to bring additional generation on board, considering the length of time as you move from request for proposal to financial close and then construction, and then parallel to that grid, ensuring that there's grid capacity, and or ensuring that where you release these opportunities for additional generation capacity is in areas that have got grid capacity. And that's why we're talking about 3 to 5 years, because we think it takes us that period for us to be able to get the new generation on board. And from Mr. Erasmus from Business Day in relation to us approaching the power ships, no. So what has been happening is that we have been inundated with these submissions to say we think that we have this offer that can be quicker. I think the point to be emphasized, although it's emergency procurement, I think it must still be transparent. I think we still need to ensure that we extend the opportunity to as many players as possible in the space, of course, through a truncated period. So the point I want to emphasize is that it's a transparent and still a competitive process. It's not something that gets to be negotiated behind closed doors. So if you had to move if for an example you talk stage 8, Eskom talks of cycles of 32 hours. In that instance, it's 16 hours of the 32 hours that you are offline at, so it's 4 times of 4 hours each in that cycle. And yes, you are absolutely right. So part of the conversation we're having with Eskom is that on the winter plan, the winter outlook first, and then the winter plan, to ensure that it responds to what that outlook is. I did say the last time when we met here that we received a presentation, myself and Minister Godlan, from the Eskom board, of course, supported by the EXCO there. There were a few questions that we asked, and then those questions, some of them required additional refinement, addressing, and then they'll be coming back to us. But yes, every intention is there to ensure that we are able to communicate this to the country. And then the point that we did emphasize, we are not going to relent on this, is the need for us to be transparent to the country. I think it's in everyone's interest. The issues that relates to Quebec, part of the reason why Eskom is unable to join us here is because they are at Quebec, and I think part of that is to attempt to answer some of the questions that had been raised before. And of course, you know that in relation to Unit 1, we already have a significant outage slip. I think it's anything between 40 to 45 days. The projected time of return now is now early August. And that's the kind of challenges that we are talking about. These outage slips are costing the economy an inordinate amount of money. So I want to reserve those to Eskom, and part of them being at Quebec is to ensure that they get to familiarize themselves with what the situation is, and I'm sure that they'll be able to be sufficiently empowered to be able to communicate to the country in relation to those details. But it's an important part. It sits on the critical part. And just to Mr. William Horn on the demand side incentives. So the first one is to say that we think that all of us have got an obligation to contribute to ensuring that the energy situation the economy is ameliorated from this devastating energy situation that threatens to, if you like, cripple the economy of the country. So I think it's important that there's an overall appreciation by every household, every individual, that in fact the power is in our hands. And that's why we're saying that working with Eskom outside the energy-intensive users, outside big industry, because there's already, if you like, solutions around load curtailment, the incentive of 3 million rand per megawatt saved during particular period. We think that households can make that contribution. And for our part, we're working with the National Treasury. We've been assigned, myself and Minister Godongwana, to see what is it that additional incentive to make it possible for almost every household to be able to acquire these devices, and we are able to install it at each and every household. We have done a computation. We are sitting conservatively with about 8 million geysers, and I did say that if you have 200,000 of these, installed remotely controlled. Of course, the ones that have got households that have got connected to Wi-Fi, there's a technology that you can use to get access, direct access to those and remotely control, of course, also informing the household user. And then others, they use different forms of technologies, GSM, we use cell phone towers. And it's a configuration of all of those solutions. Once we bring them to bear, some of them will require some degree of financial support, and that's what we are trying to work on, especially for poor households. We're talking to some of the commercial banks on some of their clients to see if they can design a solution to make it possible for some of these clients. In addition, if you like, to their loans that they've taken with the bonds that they've taken with the bank to add on. I mean, when we did the computation, it ranges anything from 2,000 to about 3,000, including these units and their installation. So that's something that we're talking with the banks, and once we conclude that, we should be in a position to announce what those set of measures are. But I think there's a direct incentive. I think, like I said, the household consumption at peak, it's about 35%. Anything between 30 and 50% of that consumption is on the back of, on account of geysers. If you are able to reduce that consumption, you'll feel it in the pocket, assuming that the municipality's billing is correct, is not estimations. You'll be able to see there's a rate of a return in relation to that investment that you have made, in addition to your contribution to the totality of demand reduction, and by extension the result of the reduction of stages of load shedding. And with regards to approval with procuring cross-border, we did say that those ESCOM must still sign the PPA, and I guess that in terms of their governance structure is something that has to pass through the board for them to make that determination. But where we are, I think there's a degree of alignment between ourselves and ESCOM, just a general appreciation that we are faced with the crisis. We'll do everything within the realm of reason, rationality, to be able to borrow on solutions that are going to help us to resolve the solution going into the future. In relation to gas stoves, helping households for the purchase of that is not something that is sitting with us now. We think that there's cheaper and quicker solutions that we can work on in the short to medium term. Thanks.
Just one small one.
Rudy, just before you go.
Yeah.
Tagalani, just before, what's that again? Just before Rudy goes, do you want to field the last question, and perhaps if it's Rudy's, then he'll take it as the last one? This microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Garland. What will be the last batch of questions we have still?
Sorry, the batch. You said what?
No, they keep on coming.
I think at some point you'll cut off, because I see a little bit of repetition, but at the same time, let's cut off this last batch, and we'll let Mr. Dix field what he can, and then we end off with Minister if necessary, then I'll close. Thank you, Tagalani. We can't go too long in a day. We want to keep them as close to an hour on a week as possible.
Yeah.
So Taki, let's give you a chance, and don't, if something's repeated, then I will just have to leave it as that, and the member of the media will just pick it up from previous responses, okay?
Thank you. We will still hear from business report, and the question is, what measures will the government implement to assist business affected by higher stages of load shedding in case we move beyond stage 6? And are there any plans to assist with diesel rebates or reduction of the fuel levy, just as we saw when petrol rose to record highs at the height of the Russia-Ukraine war? And Miriam is again from e-business intelligence. The question is, when will the revised load shedding code of practice, seen as crucial for safely implementing load shedding beyond stage 8, be approved? And if it is not approved soon, will we run the risk of not having proper guidelines when the deeper stages of load shedding are required by the system operator? And will there be more load curtailment for industrial energy users in the revised code? That should be it for the day. Thank you.
Okay. Minister will cover some of them. So I just wanted to say what Minister, we were told earlier today that Eskom board has approved the load shedding reduction program, the emergency procurement program, and the cross-border trade. And so this is sitting now with nurses. So I think that's been a fairly useful way of trying to get it to expedite that. So that's really good news, just to update it. On the pricing of the standard offer, it's a bit complex. I'm trying to explain it as simple as possible, right? So there's two pricing offers. There's the static one, which is basically you on a fixed price, and this is the regulated price on the basis of the cost recovery price, which is there. So you could opt for that if you want to participate in the standard offer program, right? And that generally is close to the wholesale price of electricity that has been sold, and that's the kind of cost recovery price or the cost that is passed on to Eskom in its wholesale market as it sells electricity. Then there's the variable dynamic pricing model, and this is very new and quite important. And the variable dynamic model basically looks at the day-ahead market. So it basically looks at the price at 2 o'clock today, and this sets the price for the next day. And therefore, you could opt for that. Now, the price, of course, depends on how the trade between supply and demand happens, and that price is set. But it has a cap. It has a cap of 1.93 cents, right? So when you decide to participate in the standard offer program, you have to upfront choose which program you have to engage in. So I don't specifically know exactly what Calvin Power Station had participated in, but those are the options that are there. As for the business, I think we've covered this quite on numerous occasions. More recently, I think the announcement by the Minister of Finance in the budget speech had given relief for households and, of course, for businesses relating to investments into rooftop solar and PV, and I think these are important. Minister had also just provided an update as to the program to support small businesses, and that's through the forgot the name of the program now. The Treasury one, yes. The bounce back scheme. Sorry, Minister. I think I'm tired now. The bounce back scheme that was there. Yes, the bounce back scheme. Yes, the bounce back. That's what I said. The bounce back scheme. I think that's an important part about some of the conversations. Again, if you think about the demand side measures and the energy efficiency measures that are there, there are lots of incentives that are in place and that we need to finalize to be able to ensure that we're able to provide that kind of support. Critically for us is to be able to create an environment that allows for both big business, energy-intensive users, and small businesses and households to be able to access a whole suite of different incentives and interventions across the board that have been provided by government, by the National Treasury, and to encourage people to be able to support and continue doing business by investing in alternative usage of energy. Of course, you'll continue to depend on Eskom, but at the end of the day, what it does require is for us to be able to manage our lives, and for businesses in particular that are not affected are able to invest in a whole set of different technologies that can support it. On the load shedding code, yes, this is an ongoing conversation. It is not finalized yet. Ministers have been engaging with us, in particular around the winter plan that will be announced fairly soon. Rightly so, I think there's a critique that was raised that why is it not being announced. That has been finalized and discussed. The ministers, together with the Eskom leadership, will make that announcement as soon as possible. That, of course, depends again on how that will impact on the schedules and the different stages of load shedding, and that has to go through the advisory committee, of course, and to update those particular sets of practices and the load shedding code. That's going to be quite important for us to be able to do that going forward. So that's an ongoing conversation, and an announcement will be made on that as soon as possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Rudy.
Thank you very much again for those questions. I think Rudy has covered the issues around business support. I did indicate what the measures that we are taking, and I must say that in addition to that, the bounce back scheme is about creating a facility to make it possible for for small, medium enterprises to access for the rollout of solar PV. I mean, the NEF has got some program that they are designing. So part of the thing is to bring them under one umbrella so that there's a one-stop shop for people to be able to access these opportunities. There's predictability, there's certainty in how you access it, and we're able to move with speed. When I met the various industry players, so I met, like I said earlier on, the farmers in the country, they were making the point that they're spending inordinate amount of money on upfront capital costs to buy generators to support their operations, and there's of course ongoing operational costs associated with running those generators, and typically that's diesel. That comes at the cost, and then they are going to pass that cost to the end consumer. When I said with the Consumer Council, which is really an umbrella body that brings together all the big retailers and independents in the country, I mean, one of them was saying, and in fact, when they publish their results, they make the point that they spend about 600 million rands just on operational costs associated with the unmet demand. And all of them have the following to say, is that, of course, including the independent healthcare providers, the two major healthcare providers in the country. And all of them, they say something that is very common in all that they are saying, is that, look, government must consider this thing about rebates with regards to fuel. And if you come to think of it, there's merit to that. And what is the merit? You know that the fuel cost is got a number of taxes that are embedded in there. And these taxes did not anticipate that people will be buying fuel principally to support activities that have to do with the state's inability to deliver on its promise to provide uninterrupted and quality energy supply. And as a result, they have to resort to these measures. And some of them were arguing that essentially this amounts to a windfall tax, because you are benefiting from your own ineptitude to provide, if you like, that basic promise of electricity. And you can't be benefiting from that. And they were making a case that, can we get rebates? We're putting together, engaging with them, we're computing what that is. And we did say on Wednesday when we were in cabinet that we will come back with what that means. Of course, it's a national treasury consideration. What is the point I'm making is that it's something that is receiving urgent attention to ensure that we are able to make it possible for businesses to operate, because their intention is to continue to operate, provide the job, protect the jobs, and essentially continue to ensure that the South African economy is not crippled. I want to say the following as we conclude. I think we have responded to the batch of questions. We remain open to this engagement. Of course, we're committed to a weekly engagement. We're going to try and just have a focused, if you like, approach to this weekly engagement. Of course, you are free to raise any other issue. You are not just restricted to that. But what we also want to do is to invite you to join us as we go into the field, so that we are able to illustrate to you that some of these projects are in fact happening. Because it's one thing to have this conversation on these various social media platforms, various communication platforms, and in person. It's quite another just for you to have an appreciation. When you say Kusile Unit 1 and 3 is going to come on stream, you just don't have an appreciation. So we'll be working out a schedule for you to join us as we go to these areas where these projects are happening, so that there's a tangible appreciation of about the efforts that we are making. And also there's demands, justifiably so, from various media houses for the minister to come on studio to do this. Like I said, we want to be very, very transparent. We don't necessarily have to wait for this briefing session. So what we'll do, we'll coordinate with yourselves so that as we have there's competing demands on the diary, but it's important that we need to keep the country informed. And I'm the principal communicator on the electricity interventions, severity and frequency of load shedding. So we're going to use every opportunity to connect with the public and also get to answer very robust and difficult questions that you are asking on behalf of the public. So we'll find a way of elegantly coordinating that so that we know there's some certainty will be with this media house, that media house, so that is managed and we're able to provide the kind of opportunity that is necessary for us to be able to communicate with the South African public. But having said that, thank you very much for making time, and we are committing to ensuring that this continues uninterrupted. Thanks, Mike.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we close, I do want to just reiterate one word, and I'm sure, I do hope that it's on behalf of everybody, that it's very critical, the words the Minister used about democratizing information. You know, I saw one comment on the social media last week about, but why are you giving us a briefing? You know, I really just want to reiterate that democratizing information, as the Minister said, it's how we go on this journey together as a nation. Not load shedding can't be ended in one day. But as the Minister is saying, these sessions are doing that job of really getting us all as a nation immersed in that journey together. So I do hope that, Minister, I'd like to thank you sincerely for your being available to us each week. Mr. Dix, thank you to you. Colleagues, I just want to remind you, as I said earlier, Daphne Mokwena of Eskom and the team are available. I've been speaking to her on the WhatsApp, and Takalani will ensure that those of you who raised questions relating to Eskom, they'll link them up. And lastly, Minister and Rudy and colleagues, those members of the media who said something about demand management, right? So 2 or so weeks ago, those of us who care, we must, I installed that thing to switch your geyser on and off, because I kept forgetting. So I'm going to be on this challenge here, Minister, on this podium each fortnight or each week to tell you what happened when my geyser went off and went on. And I have a good feeling that it's already yielding results. So if we can do it, let's do it, South Africa, for our nation. Let's bring our part. And also then those who are unable to always be able to pick up some of those, perhaps a little bit more expensive thing, we bring our side to ensure that we do bring our geysers under control, our Wi-Fi's and other things. Okay, so I hope in the weeks to come I can give you good news that I've been able to save some energy and put it into that 1,000 megawatt target we're pursuing as a nation. So with that, I'd like to thank members of the media for your time, both online and physically here at Sedimonsetso House. We will endeavor each week to give a bit of heads up as to whether we'll be physical or virtual. Remember, as Minister said, please let's talk to SABC media team with the media. There's a number of brilliant outreach events happening so we can go and see for ourselves. So without further ado, I'd like to draw the briefing to a close for this week and thank all of you sincerely for your consistent interest in this work we're doing in building our nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.